Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Innovate Connect. You've joined our continuing series on creating innovative thinking across industries and disciplines. My name is Chris Vogel. I'll be hosting the event today. We have some very distinguished panelists, which I'll introduce in a moment. Today, our topic is Agile learning in ambiguous times. You're going to hear about a couple of things from the panelists about how education is changing in our virtual world, methods being utilized to create agility and empathy for our team members. And they're going to offer some options to you to consider in your own environment to grow personal and professional development in your staff. Today, we have three distinguished panelists. We have Donna Bembenek. She is the president of Catholic School in Waukesha, Wisconsin. She has experience working both in private and public sectors. And prior to working for the school and leading it, she was the National Vice President of Marketing and Communications for the YMCA. Welcome, Donna. We have Zarir Erani. Zarir is the president of Allen Interactions. And an interesting note about them, their mission is to drive the world and rid it of boring learning. And they've been very agile and changing with the times right now. So I think it's a very high benefit to all of us to have Zarir with us today. And we have Clint Link. Clint serves the Waseca public school system in southern Minnesota as the district technologist and innovation specialist. So in that role, he helps educators find innovative ways to transform teaching and learning. His expertise is in hybrid learning, guiding students and teachers through design thinking workshops, leading professional development through micro-credentialing, and the integration of technology tools to increase student engagement. So thank you and welcome to all of you. We're going to follow a format today where the panelists are each going to give us their thoughts on three different things to help drive the conversation. We're going to spend about 10 minutes on each topic. And the first topic is kind of what's happened and what's happening in our current environment. So organizational agility needed, the different multiple teaching scenarios that we're experiencing right now, and really this ambiguity impacts on people that are probably not comfortable with ambiguity. A lot of us aren't. Then the second topic we'll go to after we discuss that will be what actions are being taken now to deal with these situations now that we understand in our first topic the current state. And then the third topic will be recommendations from our panelists about what you might consider doing. At any time, you can go ahead and utilize the chat function within Zoom in order to start logging questions. We're going to reserve about 15 minutes or maybe 20 minutes worth of time at the end of our conversation in our 1-hour format today to go through those questions. You can direct them at a particular panelist if you have a specific question you want to ask, or at the panelists in general, and they will answer those questions back to you to the best of their ability in these ambiguous times we're in. So with that in mind, I'd like to get started, and I'm going to go ahead and pose the question openly to all three panelists, and you can go ahead and share with us your thoughts about it. Don't forget to ask questions through the panel, through the chat function. So to the panelists, what's happening in your world, what has happened, and give us an idea about what's changing in these ambiguous times right now as a baseline for us to think about the rest of the discussion.
How would you like to start? Yeah.
Go ahead, Zarir.
Ladies first.
Who's going? Donna, I can go if we need to. Okay.
Donna will start.
All right.
So we here at our school did start in August, 5 days in-person instruction. And just in terms of what's happening, We started planning for the return to school in April. We have gathered a variety of constituents, parents, faculty, and some kind of experts in the field of medical, doctors, HR professionals, facility professionals, attorneys, to help us put together the best plan forward and open the school on schedule in August. I'm pleased to say that we've had great compliance by our students and our support from our parents and amazing support from our faculty. Things have been going very well as we progress through the school year. We've had to put in, as you could imagine, like many schools, some very specific protocols in this to keep everybody healthy, to certainly aid with contact tracing if that became necessary. And in regard to the question about agility, I think, you know, in our school, we like to make data-driven decisions. And right now, data changes all the time and constantly. And that's where this agility comes from, because everybody around the world is learning about COVID, and we learn more every single day. And as we learn, we have to adapt. And that's where the importance of agility is something that we have to focus on. And then certainly the kind of the emotions that are kind of come along with everybody's different perspectives of COVID, and helping manage through kind of an emotional time as well. And as people kind of proceed with caution and balance the needs of our students to be in school, but at the same time to be healthy and safe, as well as our faculty. So it has certainly been an interesting time and something that's required a higher level of collaboration than ever before.
Zarir, do you want me to, I'll parlay into what you do and kind of piggyback on Donna. So as Chris said, I work with a variety of teachers and students from K to post-secondary in our school system. And I would say in this, all the precautions that Donna spoke to, the planning, the leadership teams, even from the state level of planning for 3 different types of learning environments that we were going to have, and trying to have a plan that's flexible to work in an environment where students are face-to-face, teachers face-to-face, or they're in school part of the day or multiple days, only a few days a week, to just straight full online learning too. And we have to give our students and families choices to choose between those environments then as well. So that's the definition of ambiguity that we had. And trying to take an organization, education in general, I would categorize as something that all Americans have experienced, all have a similar experience to it. Some of us had a more positive lens through it, the traditional environment, than others. But at this time, this is turning it on its head for all of us that did teaching and learning in a traditional classroom, face-to-face model. And what we've really done in, I think, change from the spring, where that was emergency distance learning that we had to do during the pandemic and the lock of place scenarios, to now where we actually have a plan, we have feedback, we're getting constant feedback. We're having a meeting here in 2 hours about getting more feedback from our families of how to make pivots in this scenario, and being okay with making those pivots. Normally in an educational environment, to make a pivot requires months, if not years, to make that, and now we're doing it in weeks. And even it's out of our hands a lot of the time too, where for our school, we have about 1,900 students, and we have a federal prison in our community, and we had an outbreak of COVID in our prison. So, and we also had an outbreak with our soccer and band program too. So we had to make a pivot to distance learning for our 7-12 environment, but we kept our K-3 environment and our 4-6 environment as is. And one was in a hybrid environment and one is in a face-to-face environment. And so because all that shifting is happening, we have to make that communication out there with people. We have to change teachers' plans. We have to have accessibility for all our things. It's really a shift for us right now of something that's constant to something that isn't. And that's, I think, in general, what education is going through right now, like a lot of the business community is too. But the difference between business is they're accustomed to innovating and moving quickly. In education, we're not accustomed to that as much. So I'll leave it there.
I guess I'll chime in a little bit. You know, we've got an educational kind of perspective, and although our business is education, we're primarily business. And so I'll give you the business perspective as I see it right now. And as you guys were speaking, this meme came into my head of these little kids, right? Kindergartners, and how difficult it is to put these restrictions on them, right? Sit at your desk, wear your mask. And the meme was this mom looking at her young son, must have been a kindergartner or something like that. And she says, "That's not the mask I sent you to school with." And he says, "Yeah, I traded it with Marcia, and Marcia traded it with Steve." And so they're trading masks to come home with a different one. And I'm like, I can't even imagine trying to keep these little ones engaged with what we're asking them to do. But from a business perspective, you know, one of the things that I think hit us pretty quickly, and this was mid-March, right? We kind of went into lockdown mode, and almost every business had to go remote first. And many weren't prepared, right? They hadn't invested in that type of scenario with regard to the collaboration tools, the calendaring capabilities, the ability to innovate and meet. And so that was, I think, kind of shocking to all of us to not be there. And as you all know, you know, trust occurs in the white space between meetings. And we've lost that space between meetings where we're having those micro transactions with each other to build trust, because everything is just a meeting now, right? It's just Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting to talk to each other. And so we're missing that, that
I think we've hung on your link there, Zarir. So looks like we've achieved a Zoom impasse in technology connection here temporarily. So I think we want to hear more about that from you, but we'll come back to you when we make sure that you've got a solid connection as well. So I'm going to ask Donna to talk a little bit about our next topic. Is so you've had to be agile, you've had to be flexible, you've had to go to a place where we don't understand what the future looks like. What innovation have you been doing as an organization in order to try and cope with this environment we have now? And Zarir will be back in a minute, I'm sure, but let's go on and then we'll come back to him as well. So Donna, if you will.
Yes, so certainly Clint talked about all these different models of education that have to be working simultaneous. So being able to be ready, we have students who are virtual, whose families have decided that while Catholic Memorial is in person 5 days a week, their family need might be that their students learn virtually. So using technology in new ways and having students participating in class in person and via Teams. Our faculty have had to, how you prepare curriculum and how you plan your class management is very different when the students are participating in different ways. One real tangible way that we've had to innovate is around our internship program for our students. Last year, we started this internship program. We had kids our seniors going into companies and benefiting from hands-on learning opportunities. Some of those companies, while the programs have been very popular by our students, families, and the companies, many of those companies don't have their own employees back in their normal kind of cadence of a day. we've had to innovate, make sure we had those learning opportunities. We've partnered with a nonprofit farming organization in a suburb not too far from Catholic Memorial. And our kids are now being able to help with this particular farm that serves people with limited mobility and various handicap accessibility. And our engineering students are building out infrastructure for this farm. And it was a way for us to continue that hands-on, very specific learning environment where they're doing very tangible work for this organization. A lot of that work can happen in our STEM lab. And the students are able to do the construction and do the engineering that's required right on our campus, and then go to the farm and help implement it. But we've had to look at new ways of providing that tangible hands-on learning opportunity for students that our families prioritize, the kids enjoy, and the business partners really do value. But looking at, so what do we do to continue those programs when many of the companies don't have their own employees coming back and couldn't host an intern this year? So we've had to pivot, innovate, and it's going really well.
Wow.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
I'm back.
Yeah.
So
That's exciting.
darn
Zarir,
me.
we lost you there for a minute, but we knew you'd be back.
I switched to my mobile hotspot because MediaCom's internet went down.
Well, it happens. And that's why we've got to be agile and innovative, I guess, in these times as well. So I asked Donna to talk very briefly about the next topic, which was how is she innovating? But I would like to come back to you temporarily here, make sure we close out this discussion around what's happening on the business side as well. And you were talking about the loss of micro interpersonal connections and what was happening in that business environment. So I apologize, but let's go back temporarily and talk about that. We want to hear about that, and then we'll kind of continue to move forward on our next topic. So if you will, Zarir, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and I apologize for being in and out here. So, you know, the lack of those interactions, I think, causes a breach in trust to some degree, or the inability to build trust on an ongoing basis. And when you don't have trust generally flowing within your culture, you know, it could lead to anxiety, right? And obviously, lots and lots of companies, you know, locally and nationally, have suffered economically because of this downturn. I know in early March when this occurred, it's like all of a sudden our flow of work stopped almost immediately, and we were, you know, we were reeling from it to figure out, well, what do we do now? That's since picked up, right? Because people have started to adapt. They've started to realize that, you know, this remote world is kind of the new world we're living in, at least for the time being. And they're starting to make the appropriate investments to future-proof their business. But it was shocking for us, and it caused a lot of anxiety within the team and within the leadership team and things like that. And so, you know, what do we do in scenarios like that? And so we started to do things like happy hour. Virtual happy hours that weren't business related at all. It was just about talking with each other. We started, you know, playing games, learning more about each other. And so we were doing that just about once a week, just to kind of build that in between time. So that was one of the tactics we took to kind of keep the team together and to provide hope and just comfort that we were there for each other as we moved through this. And so that was one of the things that I think we did early on that I think had a material impact on people's well-being, to realize that we're all in this together and we're going to work through this together to get to the other side. So that's kind of the perspective I wanted to kind of share a little bit. What we saw with regard to training and learning is many companies, you know, just like we were on the educational side, were instructor-led training, right? Most of the curriculum at corporations are go in a room, listen to a speaker, interact with each other, things like that. And companies tried to just move that model to virtual instructor-led training. Well, it doesn't translate very easily at all, as we saw in the educational thing on the emergency side in March. You know, we just didn't have the techniques to keep people engaged. And the other thing that we're missing is when we're in these Zoom calls, we still have access to our browsers and everything else. And so, are people actually giving you their full attention and actually listening to the conversation and what's being taught? Or are they distracted by other things because it's so easy to do other things while you're engaged in whatever conversation you're having? So those are some of the things that we saw early on of what was happening.
And so we'll come back to you in a second. Thank you, Zarir. I'm going to shift to Clint at this point on the second topic as well around innovation. So we understood a little bit of your baseline. We heard some of Donna's feedback around how they completely changed how they engage students. Can you talk about a little bit about what you've done to innovate for the current environment?
Yeah, I'll touch on one of our schools to kind of give a baseline example of it. And we all know this in innovation of crisis is an opportunity, and it gets us in a like mindset, a common enemy, a common goal. It pushes us towards something maybe that we weren't too sure about before. And in education, that's personalized learning. Personalized learning has been a concept for a long time to try to give the experience, the student view of the experience versus experience that all of us in a class or in a content area all progress through the material at the same rate. We know we're not reaching all of our people and getting their best out of them in that, but it's a very efficient model to work through, and it's been working for some time. So the personalized learning is this generic term that we use that we don't know, really can't put things into action. And so that's what this timing of COVID really allowed us to move forward in our 4 through 6 building in 2 parts. We introduced a few years ago the concept of standards-based grading, which moves away from the A, B, C, D, F concepts to taking a subject. Let's just use math, for example. Instead of just having a singular math grade, you would have 7 to 8 math grades, we call learning targets, inside of those. So now we can delineate what part of the math you really do excel in and what part of the math you don't. And so it's not an average or an overall feel for math for it. And that really personalizes the experience for the learner. So that's just the assessment part of it. The next part of it is how it's taught. And the emergency distance learning was exactly what Zarir was talking about, of how we're trying to take what we did virtually in the room to put it online, where I'm preaching to the choir, so to speak, and hoping people are engaged in my storytelling, in my actions, and my enunciations, and my visuals that I have. But maybe they're not. Maybe they don't have internet connection. Maybe something's going on behind them that's distracting them in that environment. So we have to change from what we call that as a synchronous teaching technique to an asynchronous model, where it's in more of a recording or it's more of a practice experience. And so we developed what we call learning modules. And the learning modules has 3 facets to it. And it's the learn part of the content, then there's a practice segment to it, and then there's a mastery segment to it. So you learn it, you practice it, and when the practice is ready, you go show me that you understand this concept. And that's a personalized way. You move through that content and you do the practice on your own or with a group of students. And then when you're ready, you take the assessment, not just because the teacher's ready to give the assessment on Fridays. It's when you're ready. So after a while here, we're going to have students kind of staggered at different areas. And that's an uncomfortable spot for a teacher to be in teaching, because of you're working with them at where they are. And so developing these modules has been a lot of work. We had over the summer, getting our teachers to put these modules together, make them engaging. And then we have to teach our students how to navigate through the modules. And now we're having conferences actually yesterday and today, getting our parents up to speed. And actually after this meeting's done, we got another meeting, you guys know the meeting world, of how we're going to communicate that out with families so they better understand where we're going with this. And then how does this module type learning, now when the pandemic is over, or contained a little, can we work in this environment when we're back face to face again? So those are things that we're doing here. I think that allowed us, we have open mindset to it, allowed us to view it and try it. And if without the pandemic, we wouldn't have had that kind of support and common goal to push through. And you'd only be working with people that have that vision already versus now everyone has that vision, and we're moving forward at that. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Clint.
That's fantastic, Clint. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking that's brilliant and exactly where we need to be going, right? It's the difference between pedagogy and andragogy. So pedagogy is about variable results in a fixed time frame. And most people have different learning levels and pathways to that, right? And the goal of learning is primarily doing the right thing at the right time. If we can achieve that gives us the success we're looking for, where andragogy is more fixed results, variable time. And I think that's kind of where I'm hearing you guys going, which I think is just brilliant because it's allowing people to master the skills, right? So once they learn the form and they practice it, they're able to improvise with that information in the real world. And I think that's a lot of what, Allen Interactions really stands behind, is this whole idea of let's get people to master this stuff. And we all know that it takes experiences, right, to learn new things. And oftentimes as humans, we learn most from our mistakes than we do from our successes. It's the pain of that mistake. And so, e-learning from our perspective, and I completely agree with this, is can you challenge the individual to actually respond and then show them the consequences of a false response or wrong response, and then give them the corrective feedback, because that's going to trigger that long-term memory retention. And I think in a lot of cases, educational systems historically have been kind of tell and test, right? And that doesn't necessarily work for human beings for long-term retention. So I love to hear what the Waseca district is doing on this front. It's really good. So from a business perspective, I talked about ILT moving to VILT. And so what are some of the innovative things that can be done? And I think this pandemic has kind of created a catalyst moment to say, are we prepared to future-proof our businesses, right? Are we able to actually make the investments we need to weather these types of storms that come against us? And, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, it almost feels like we're in this era of pandemics, right? We had Mars and SARS and this and that. And it seems like every year, and mainly election years, there's a pandemic going on. And this one obviously is probably the most critical of them that we're experiencing, because it's had such a wide spread reach, and the transmission rates are so much higher. So what are we doing as businesses? And I think it all starts with safety, right? You got to kind of go back to Maslow's hierarchy and ensure, the physiological and safety and security needs of our employees are met. If they're not, that's where their attention is. Their attention is not on learning. Their attention is not on growing. It's not on self-actualization or creativity or any of those things. And so I think companies need to start there. How do you create a level of safety and security for your people so that they're able to kind of rise above those basic needs and start into those growth needs, which is the goal. So I think companies that focus on empathy, focus on grace, focus on the things that let people know that you care about them and take care of them. And I know it's tough. Many companies had to lay off people and things like that. Well, that doesn't provide for safety and security for the remaining people, but sometimes businesses need to do what they need to do. But in those moments, can you do that with grace? Can you do that with as much love as you can muster to provide that concern for the people that are back, remaining, and the people that have left, right? Can you help them find other jobs, things like that? I think that's part of what we need to do as leaders as we kind of move into this, world that we're kind of living in. And so that was kind of how I was looking at it. It's like, how are we going to provide that safety net for people so that they can actually learn? Because if they're not feeling safe, they're not going to learn. Their attention is in the wrong spot. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
So let me ask Thank you, Zarir. Let me ask Donna and Clint as well around what they may have had to do as it relates to psychological safety for their own staff members in this very ambiguous world as well. So have you done innovative things, as sort of Zarir mentioned, around creating those trust relationships again with your staff in some other way, or what have you had to do, if you would?
One of the things, the new things that we did, and some of this was predicated prior to COVID, but exacerbated by COVID. Our teachers had identified, increasing anxiety among teenagers is well documented, and COVID has only made that worse. And teenagers have, go-to faculty, adults in the building that they are trusted adults in many cases, and confide in those adults. And sometimes our faculty felt like what that student needed was beyond actually their professional expertise, and certainly wanted to help the students. That's where their compassion comes from, but felt like they needed somebody that would be available to them, the faculty, so that they felt like the student was well cared for. And one of the things we did is partnered with a new agency so we could embed some of those mental health services right on our campus this year. We felt like that way, it actually was as much of a support to our faculty as it was to our students, because the faculty, when they've identified a student they feel is at risk or needs something with a very specific skill set, they have now somebody to refer that student to, that can then provide that student the kinds of support they need. Families have been very happy about that. It was something we had been talking about prior to COVID as a need, but certainly now with COVID, we felt like this was going to be an important part of this school year. And Zarir, I couldn't, literally 2 words we use all the time is empathy and grace. And if we're going to help teachers kind of be able to shoulder the worry they feel about students because of how they're great teachers and they worry about their students. And so by providing these services on our campus, it also not only is a direct service to the student, but it alleviates some of the worry the teachers were shouldering themselves when a student was confiding in them about something that was weighing heavy on their minds. So that's something that we have done this year as a Catholic school. We certainly have other resources available to us that families build around our faith community, and certainly with our chaplain and campus ministry, provide those avenues as well. So as members of religious communities have had to step away from their parishes, and churches were not able to provide the same kind of resources that families were typically experienced, Catholic Memorial became that link to their faith that maybe they were missing at their own church because they couldn't attend those services as they were accustomed to. So I think the emotional support, both through our campus ministry, but also through the embedded services that we've added to our school structure, have been an important part of supporting faculty and students.
Clint, do you want to come off of mute? Thank you.
My fault, guys. We're in the human business in education, and this is the big one. This is definitely one we haven't solved, but I will tell about things that we have done that I think are successful and will continue to be successful. Is in our hybrid environment, traditionally, in a traditional environment, we have 5 days of school a week. What we've done is we've moved to 2 or 4 days for the students, 2 for one group, 2 for another group. And then the 5th day is all distance for everybody. And in that environment, the biggest part of professional development and growth and connections, remediations, and those sort of things that we do in education is time. When do we do those pieces in between all the instruction? pieces. When you give staff an entire day where they're still having distance learning, but it's more in an asynchronous mode, they don't need the teacher at that very moment, that frees them up now to do the reach outs to the particular kids. It allows them to get with their colleagues to talk about students and students that they're struggling with or students that are excelling. It also gives them an opportunity to professionally learn from each other of successes that they're having in their particular classrooms with techniques or tools or things that are changing. I think that's a big part, and it allows them to connect with each other, which rarely, in an education environment, we'll have 3 to 4 professional development days a year. And typically in those days, all I can think about as a teacher is I'm getting caught up on things that I'm doing in my room. I'm not really laser focused on what I'm supposed to be learning to become better. Now, if this is happening more regularly every week, I can kind of let that go now a little more, and I can really focus my time in and professionally develop and meet my colleagues, talk to my colleagues, maybe even outside of my content area or my grade levels that I have. So having that one day a week and that kind of flexibility inside of it, I really think that's a transformational thing, and we might even consider doing once the pandemic is done.
Great, thank you. I want to get to our next topic, and I think if we can stick to about a couple minutes a piece, really recommendations to our listeners today about what they might want to consider around education and psychological safety of their staff, and any of the topics we talked about today, about maybe the top couple of things that you think are important relating to taking an innovative approach to dealing with education and the education staff going forward. So we'll do a little round robin here. If you can make recommendations, as Zarir said, one of the best things is from our failures. Don't be afraid to share your failures. And let's have a quick discussion on that. Donna, you want to start for us, please?
Be happy to, thank you. One thing I would suggest, whether in education or any industry, is that these moments in time where we can get really caught up because there's so much to do day to day managing through COVID. We will get through this. And I think it's important that you have identified staff who are working on your strategic plan initiatives, that you're continuing to focus on the long-term vision that you've set for your organization, that you don't get so dug into the reality of today that you forget to be continuing your planning going forward. And then we've done that. So while we're working on everything we have to manage through the current COVID pandemic, we continue to do implementation around our strategic plan priorities. And we have people who have to work on the day-to-day of managing the school right now, but we've carved out people when we said, we want you to keep us true to our strategic plan. And I think it's really important because you can lose momentum, and we'll come outside the back end of COVID. We'll learn certainly things, Clint just mentioned, things that we're learning through this process that we'll carry forward, that are good things, good practices that will continue. But we all have strategic plans, and how do we keep the organization so you don't find yourself, a year, 18 months, or 2 years from now, feeling like you missed 2 years toward planning for the future of your organization. And so we've dedicated resources. I think that could be an easy mistake, is to get so focused on the emergency of COVID that you forget that you have an organization that needs to continue to grow and develop and thrive even after COVID. And you don't want to lose a year or two of planning toward your long-term initiatives. So focusing long-term while you manage the short-term, near-term reality.
Great, thank you, Donna. Zarir, recommendations, learnings that you've had?
Yeah, I love what Donna's saying. I mean, organizations were instantiated primarily for a purpose, right? And we don't want to lose that core purpose, and we don't want to lose that hope that there is a better place ahead of us. And while we need to ensure that we're able to be adaptable and agile towards reaching that purpose, I think continuing to plan and changing how you're doing things. A quick example on our front is much of our lead generation from a business perspective used to happen through in-person conferences. Well, they all disappeared. And so we had to switch tactics to do more webinars and more blogging. And I mean, we completely changed our marketing tactics, to alter, because we still believe in our purpose, which is helping people, become better at what they do and mastering the skills that they need to be successful. So my recommendation primarily would be focus on leadership training. I think some of the things that companies need more than ever in times like this is how are leaders, working with their teams. And I think many leaders end up, moving from subject matter experts in whatever field or function that they're doing, and they've never really been coached, right? Or they've never been taught, what does it mean to be a leader? And I'm not talking about, heroic leadership kinds of things. I'm talking about everyday leaders. Like we all are, individual contributors are leaders. And so having some sort of curriculum around that to allow people to kind of master those skills, of empathy and, the human skills that we need in order to function in an organization, I think would be one of the first levers I would pull, because I think that is where the rubber hits the road. If you don't have that, it's very easy for the company to fall apart in difficult times. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Zarir. Clint?
Well, I'll go right off that on Zaire, and then I'll go into what my recommendation will be is in the leadership piece, especially now, we have a comfort zone, and most leaders are in the position they are because they were in positions that they're leading before. They're in multiple positions more than likely. They have great experience in those areas, so they're able to lead effectively at those. What's different now, and this is pre-COVID too, what's different now is we're in the fourth industrial revolution now. We're going through multiple paradigm shifts in a career where leaders were leading at one point of an experience that they had where the paradigm shift has moved, and now they have to lead something that they never experienced themselves before. And that's what we're doing right now in education. And I talk to our director of teaching and learning about this all the time of it's hard for me to give out suggestions or things that I did as a classroom teacher at one point to them because I didn't do those things. However, I am able to continually learn and be up on what best practice is so that I can lead in that environment. And so we go from this comfort zone to this panic area, and most of it's in between. Right? And so it's just leading in this in-between, this ambiguity. That's why we're having this webinar here of things that I never experienced as a person that I'm leading. All right, I'm just pegging on the Zaire part of it. Now I'm gonna go into my suggestion, and that kind of piggybacks into that same scenario of professional development. Professional development is gotta move from being a one direction thing. We have to move into a competency-based concept, and we're trying to do that with our teachers through the micro-credentialing angle of it's a slow pivot, a quick pivot of learning something that's now relevant now. I'm applying it, I'm getting feedback on it, I'm making a change, I'm applying it again, and that is for the now. And then a year, 2 years later, I'm going to have to relearn that concept, whatever the new paradigm shift is. And so it's not a traditional environment where I get a certification that's good for the rest of my life or a degree that's good for the rest of my life. It is a constant certification or a credential of some kind that you're getting, and you're just adding to your list of continuing learning and learning and learning and learning. And that is only by doing it. It's not about seat time. It's not about money that you paid for a certification. It's about doing or applying the knowledge that you have to your practice and how it's improving. and then that's the certification, and then be able to make that pivot later when the paradigm moves again, that we shift. And that's a next generation thing for us in our professional development for education, of moving past the degree, moving it past the licensure piece, and into all these hybrid learning environments that we're in right now of best practice. What best practice is today will be different best practice next year. And so we're going to be able to keep moving and applying that knowledge, but it has to be embedded into what I do every day too. So that's the recommendation I would do for the business world too. Your world is changing just as fast as ours, and not faster. You're going to have to apply new learnings that you get from other areas into what you're doing so that you can grow your organization.
Great, thank you, Clint. So I kind of heard three things. One, things are changing quickly, and we're dealing with that as it happens, but your strategic plan, take the time to adjust it effectively. And you might want to very much consider making that an agile strategic plan, because our trajectory is not easy to see at this point. So tactics related to that, leadership training. So are the leaders capable? Are we investing the time in our leadership so that they're capable to be able to deliver good leadership in ambiguous times that we're having right now? And then to Clint's point, this ambiguity, maybe COVID was just a kick in the pants we needed, because the world is changing around us at a much faster rate. And this may be our new norm, is our capability to interact more quickly and be able to lead in areas where we don't have experience, which I think is a new environment for a lot of people out there. So I want to make sure that we have time for questions out there. And again, please use the chat function to throw more questions out there if you have them. We have one to all panelists. So this is to all three of our panelists. What innovative approaches and capabilities do you see being retained or growing past COVID? And which ones might decline?
So I could start. I think, one of the innovative things that companies have had to do is obviously deal with a remote workforce, right? And I think that that's going to persist. I think many companies, especially tech companies, have already made statements that said, we're completely comfortable with remote all the time, or remote for most of the time, or whatever. So I think that's going to stay, and it's going to grow, and we're going to figure out ways to not have to commute and things like that to make it easier. And I think there's going to be some sort of evolution with regard to, how do we find that white space to collaborate and to build trust and things like that. I don't think that's happened fully as yet, but I think that's coming. And there's going to be mechanisms and tools and whatever else to help us do that. So I see that staying. What might decline post-COVID with regard to some of the changes that have occurred right now, I'm not really sure at this point. I don't have an answer because I can't see what's coming as yet. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, and so I think innovation is going to start to pick up. I think we're already seeing that. I think there's a lot of people that are coming up with solutions for this pandemic kind of period, and I think many of those will last beyond. I continue to see that growth growing, but I'm not sure if it's going to decline yet.
I would add, I agree, Zarir, and I think the innovative approaches and the use of technology and how technology is going to continue to advance education. We have learned quickly by necessity how to use technology to run a classroom. And I certainly think the use of technology in these new ways will continue. We have new ways of serving students who, for whatever reason, could not physically be in the building. Now we have trained, Clint mentioned PD, training faculty who've been long-term teachers that have embraced the use of technology in new ways to educate and engage. Some students have really thrived with the use of technology in these new ways. I often tease, I don't think there'll ever be another snow day.
Yeah.
Because now we have ways to pivot and our teachers have been now trained. I think that it's likely as teachers, as young professionals decide to take on the teaching as a career path, I think you'll see the formal training of future teachers include the use of technology-based training for instruction. Even if you're in a traditional school, we now know that there are some great options that technology provides us to enhance the learning experience for students and to provide new tools and resources for faculty.
And I'll go, the prediction to think snow days are dead. You're right, Donna. They were going dead, and lots of schools have already made it, but they are for sure dead now. But I think to me, what opens up the door of possibilities is the students that do excel in this environment, in the distant environment. They're going not to demand, but really want that environment to continue going forward. And so then how do we offer that to them systematically going forward and make it still a hybrid environment, so there's still the human connection. It's not a learning from a computer thing, right, or an algorithm of some kind. You're still connecting with classmates, you're working on projects with classmates, you're getting feedback from classmates, and how that blends into the traditional school environment. So that, I think, is something going forward is, do we have some kind of online academy, so to speak, and we train teachers in that environment, not to be the teacher, but to be the facilitator of those students. And we're building our content online now. We had 50% of our teachers at our junior senior high that were using an LMS, learning management system, where they build their lessons into. Now we're at 100%. We went quick in 6 months from 50% to 100% of people building digital content that will be there forever, and they can tweak and remodel every year. So we have the content built now. Now we can just move it on to a facilitator to help the student through it, to motivate the student through it, to connect the student with the experts on the content areas. And that's a shift that I think may be in our future here going forward. Plus the whole 1 day a week that's distance learning for everybody, I think is something that I think we would like to see happen here.
Great, thank you. I'm going to paraphrase this next question a little bit. In your existing worlds, whether it's corporate or public education or private education, which we have all represented here today, there are some measures that you utilize to understand how your clients, your students, are learning. How has those performance measures changed now that we're in a virtual environment, or have they changed versus in person?
So I can start from a business perspective. It's very interesting on the business side. Most training that companies do, they're actually measuring participants' feelings about the curriculum, about the instructor, and things like that. They're not truly impact-based measures, right? To say, did this training actually change my behavior, and did it produce the result that I'm looking for? And the reason we do training is because we're trying to drive some sort of behavior change, because we know that there's a metric that needs to move. And many companies don't take the time and effort to line up that metric. So if I'm trying to increase sales and I do training, am I correlating an increase in sales to that training? Or if I'm looking for employee retention, or if I'm looking for innovation or quality or whatever that metric is, very few companies actually correlate it to the training. You know, the after training feedback is typically, well, what did you think of the class, and how was the instructor, and, you know, was this meaningful, and this and that. And those are really soft metrics that really don't tell us whether or not that behavior has changed. Because at the end of the day, as we've all said, training is about people changing behavior to do the right thing at the right time. And that is kind of the goal of training. And that's why we learn, because we want to be equipped to be able to improvise in the real world. And so, you know, from a metric perspective with regard to ILT, instructor-led versus virtual instructor-led, I don't think there's a lot of metrics on that front on the business side. other than the fact that I think attention levels have gone down dramatically on VILT versus, the structured classroom with a instructor in person.
Clint, Donna?
Our faculty certainly have been looking at new ways of doing assessment. This became a necessity really in the spring. And when we were 100% virtual. And so the types of assessments that we did, both in a kind of for groups of students that were learning teams, and how these learning teams were, like Clint mentioned, the teacher as the facilitator, and then knowing how to assess the contribution and the capacity for learning of any individual member on that team. So certainly assessment of student work has definitely kind of moved outside of what is more of a traditional kind of test-taking model. And we're an international baccalaureate high school, so the idea of assessment is very different in our environment, and I think very appropriate within this kind of COVID world. Our students are used to internal and external assessments in different ways than might have been traditional. But I will add to that we certainly, over the summer, our faculty did professional development, and also this fall have been continually talking about new methods of assessment for students as we have to kind of adapt in this kind of virtual and hybrid world. So I would say that the idea of assessment and looking at the capabilities of student is continuing to evolve, but something that we're accustomed to, whether that be oral assessment, written assessment, project-based assessment, all are part of the overall measurement of a student's performance and the teacher outcomes.
Great, thank you. Quickly, Clint?
I'll be real quick too. With the assessment is a key part of it. I always call them the uncheatables. We have to move past things that I can Google or things that I can look over the shoulder of someone else and look at what they put for the answer and I put for the answer and I get the same credit for that. So that's competency based, that's project based, that's show me what you know with what you learned. That I can assess as a teacher now, knowing that I feel good about that. Ultimately though, the standardized tests that we are required to take through our state and federal government, those will be our tools that will show us if this technique of teaching and learning is successful, not as successful as it was before. So that'd be our metric of measurement.
Well, we have just 2 minutes left, and I just want to touch this one question. If anybody has anything sticking out in their mind related to, are there unique practices that help us with the velocity or speed and increase it of learning? Rather than just coping with what we're at, can we increase the velocity?
Yeah, I'd go right to pre-assessment. When as a classroom teacher, would teach something, if I did not do a pre-assessment to see where my students were at that time, then I had no idea if they already knew this content and how well they knew this content already. Through a pre-assessment, I can see this group of students already knows this information. We're moving on to the next module. These groups needs me to facilitate through the learning on that. So if we can get into a world where the content is already built in an accessible way for our students, and that's working with businesses like Zarir, and that has products that they can practice, and I don't have to develop it as a teacher. I just purchase it, do that piece, and then I just check for understanding. That's my job. I think that really allows kids to move through content so much quicker because you're reaching them where they're at instead of at the pace, the traditional pace that traditionally is the center of the room, the middle student in the room that we're going at time. So that's how you'd increase our abilities to get to all these things that we never get to because our pace is only 187 days a year to get through for education.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on what Clint said. This is the idea of adaptive learning, and understanding that each learner learns at a different speed, and creating solutions that allow the individual their personal plan of learning, I think is kind of where the world is going, and that's what's going to increase velocity. When we're trying to move a whole group of different people with different experiences at the same pace, a lot of times they lose interest. The people that already know the content, and the ones that don't know the content fully, kind of check out because it's going too fast for them.
I think I would add just one final thought too, to exactly what Clint and Zarir said. The idea that it's that sit and get. So, you sit, the teacher disseminates information, the student learns that, takes a test, and then you move on. We really think of design thinking, where learning is continual. It's a continuation, it's evolving. You plan something, you do that, you implement it, you learn from that, you then start over the process again. And your learning evolves because it's continual. It's not a stop start. And I think the speed and velocity of learning, if you think of it in this kind of design thinking methodology where it's continual, I think that can help manage the kind of the acceleration of work driven by technology.
Great. Thank you all. And thank you to our panelists for taking time out of your valuable schedules today to talk with our constituents. And I just want to mention, thank you, Donna, for saying design thinking, because that is our next webinar that we're going to be setting up. So you will be invited, if you're part of our community here, to our next one. It'll be about 3 weeks out from now. And we'll be focused. We'll have 2 experts in design thinking talking about what they know and how we might utilize that. So thank you again for joining us today. I hope you achieved and received value from our discussion. And we look forward to having you in our next event. And a final, again, thank you to our panelists today.
You're welcome. Thanks everybody for joining.
Have a great day. Bye
Bye-bye.
now.